I became an SDA, a Seventh-day Adventist, when I was 38. Before that, I was a Buddhist, Taoist. And it's been such a blessing since then. Do I have a clicker? How do I reverse this thing backwards? You know, prophecy was like theory. Jesus is coming back. But then, as I looked at it, it became a reality, a fact. And that was the crushing of communism in the 1980s between Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II. They were made Men of the Year by Time magazine because between Ronald Reagan, which represents the United States or government, and Pope John Paul II, who represented church, by coming together in Europe, they crushed communism. And so it became reality. In other words, church and state, which had been so strongly prophesied in the Great Controversy by Ellen White, became so powerful, so expressed, that you cannot ignore the reality. And that was when I caught on to the idea, to the concept, that the most powerful social force on earth is church and state. Why? Because Jesus is King of Kings and Jesus is Lord of Lords. King, state, Lords, church. Only He has that authority, that purity to hold that position. But man on earth desires that position. And we've seen that from Tower of Babel to Babylon to Medo-Persia onwards. And today we see in the US of A, Christian nationalism, the coming together of church and state in the US, whose constitution is to separate church and state. Now, I say that is every day's breaking news. Why? Because every day are developments of church and state. You cannot ignore this reality that a Protestant nation which separated church and state is forming church and state. Now, church and state has a lot of relevance even for people from Myanmar. When the general started problems in Myanmar, what happened? The first thing he wanted to do was to form an alliance with Buddhism. If he had succeeded, he would be even stronger. When the Ukraine war started, what did Putin want to do? He began to make friends with the church, the Orthodox Church. And he tried and he tried. And if he could do that, because Ukraine had a lot of Orthodox Christians, if he could do that, he would be even more powerful. So church and state is a power that we cannot ignore, and its reality is being asserted every day in the US. Now in February 2025, we were speaking in Damansara Church, and we were speaking for quite a few days. No, it was only for a day. And a man and his wife and several other non-SDAs came, and they listened to us talk prophecy. And he got so interested, he bought one of our prophecy scrolls, that 9-meter scroll. And he kept in touch with me. And on the second day, after we spoke, he called me and said, you know, you should speak to my cousin in Australia. He's a medical doctor, and he's a Christian, and he will be very interested in this. And I said, yeah. So I said, well, I didn't think too much of it. And then his cousin called me and said, why don't you come to my place? I've heard so much about you from my cousin in KL. Why don't you come? And I was very excited because, you know, prophecy is such a reality. And it was at a point in time when it was like blossoming, right? So I said, yeah, okay. And then I said, well, where did I go? He said, Australia. I'll send you some pictures. And he sent me this picture. And when I looked at it, I said, my, that's his place. And then he said, send me 3 pictures, 4 pictures. And he said, don't show it to anybody. I thought, what kind of a guy is this? And then he said, well, I'm a retired doctor, and I've got 20 or so people who are in the medical field, and they are meditating with me. We're Christians. Why don't you come? And you talk about, because I was a meditator for 20 years. So you come and talk about Christian meditation and talk about prophecy. And so we were there from Friday to Sunday morning. And every moment was talking to King. And if you, then he sent me a picture of his family, a birthday party. Okay, so when I looked at this picture, I said, my, he's got solar, right there. And then he's got these tanks, like, is that batteries or what, you know? And he told me he's got 150 acres there. And that, yeah, and you can see the South Pacific Ocean. Well, I said, well, I've got to get there. And he was so secretive, I thought he didn't want me to give me the address, right? Okay. So we drove up there, and this is amazing. He showed me his house, and that house was 10,000 square feet. This house, 10,000 square feet. And that's his solar. He showed me his house, he showed me his garden. He had grass cutters, he had machines, he had an oxygen tank. Because he was a respiratory doctor, and he had an oxygen tank. Yeah? He had everything working on batteries and solar. His grass cutters were on solar. So he said, when COVID started, he didn't trust it. And so came up here after COVID and built this thing. And as I spoke to them, I discovered, he showed me his house, and then he showed me this passageway, wide passageway, bookshelves on the left, bookshelves on the right. And he showed me, these are all my medical books. And that bookshelf was from here to where Roxana is sitting, full of books. Wow. And then he said, on the left, similar bookshelf. These are all my Christian books. Wow. I said, he's brought me up here and he's got all these Christian books, and I don't have as many as he has. I said, what are they about? Oh, then he mentioned a few names. And then he mentioned prophecy. I said, yeah? Which ones? And he showed me this whole lot. And I opened some of them. Yeah, they were prophecy books. So here I was, 2.5 days, to talk to a group. And this guy knew that much of Christian literature. Got me a bit nervous, you know, but got me also excited, you know. Then, on Friday morning, his guests started to arrive, 20 of them. Professional people, doctors and so forth. And the first guy who arrived said to me, oh, I hear you're going to talk about prophecy. I said, yeah. And meditation. I said, yeah. And he said, oh, I'm just about finishing a book on meditation. Oh, this got me really nervous, you know. So, anyway, when it all started, we started to talk. And we started to talk about, from the Bible, strictly from the Bible, and history. Okay? Verse by verse. Historical event by historical event. Now this stuff, a lot of this prophecy is new to them. But because it was given verse by verse, historical event by historical event, they had to follow it. Right? And so, at the end of the 2.5 days, it was Sunday morning, and we had to leave his place, which was in southern Sydney, to go to Richard G's place. We had to drive. So we didn't have much time. Okay, we were about to leave. We were still talking, and that man who owns the house, whose guests were 20, felt like, how can we non-SDAs believe all that he has said? And his last question, a challenge question, was this. Cocteau, I think I've got a slide on this. Yeah, this is his question to me. He says, Cocteau, how can no evangelical scholar teach what you have told us? How can only SDA Church have this unique truth? And he had a whole shelf full of books. Oh, it was like the last question he had, almost defensive, challenging, doubting. So, yeah, I said, yes, you have. You have a scholar called Scofield. And Scofield said, now, you folks know what the deadly wound is, right? The deadly wound is the fall of church and state during the Dark Ages in Europe that ruled for 1,260 years, and church and state broke in 1798 because the people in France were under exploitation by church and state. The church grew very rich, the kings and queens grew very rich, and the people grew very poor until food was a problem, and they rebelled. And Napoleon took the part of the people, took the Pope captive, and the Pope died in prison 6 years later. Now that was called the deadly wound in Bible prophecy. It's in Revelation 13. Now, that happened in 1798. It was sudden death of church and state. Church and state was united, married for 1,260 years. And on that day, that specific day in 1798, it just broke. So it was a deadly wound, sudden. So I said to this man, in front of his people, he asked a challenging question. So I said, yes, you have. Your evangelicals rely on this man called Scofield, who said that the deadly wound is not 1798, it's not the breakout of church and state. It is the fall of the of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. All right? And that the healing of the deadly wound is when an emperor like Nero, Roman Empire, not Holy Roman Empire, but Nero would come back as the Antichrist. Okay? And Scofield was wrong, I said. You know why? Because the fall of the Roman Empire, which Scofield said was the deadly wound, was very gradual. It wasn't deadly, sudden death. So, here is on the left, AI telling us how and over what length of time the Roman Empire fell. And here I've summarized it for you. It fell, too bright, huh? It fell gradually. Started in 117 AD, fell more in 476 AD. And then it fell finally in 1453 to the Ottoman Empire. The greatest war was 476. That's why we've got that date. But Scofield took that date as the deadly wound. And so, when Scofield took that date as a deadly wound, and the Antichrist is going to be, he said, an emperor like Nero, a crazed emperor, an Antichrist. And that's why non-SDAs, what do they fear? They fear governmental control. They fear vaccine, governmental control. They fear central bank digital currency, governmental control. They fear World Economic Forum. They fear the chip. They fear King Charles. Okay? Because that's governmental, that's state. But they do not fear the hidden apostate church. Because Scofield said it would be an emperor, an antichrist, a resurgence of the Caesars of Rome. And this is how they think. So he asked that question and I gave him an answer, and that's how we parted. Okay? But there were several of his people. There was a pastor there and his wife, and they were very appreciative of the things we told them. In fact, there was another couple that said, we can see from what you've told us over the 2.5 days that your faith and your prophetic structure, the way it's knitted together, is very compelling. We have something to think about. Okay. All right. But the fact that he asked a challenging question, to me, was very good. Very assuring that we had done our job to a point that he felt so challenged that he had to try to topple it. How can all our evangelical scholars not say this? Yeah. And it is important for us to bring this home to their minds. So, whatever it is, there is dispute, there are vast interpretations of prophecy, but at the time of the end, all mysteries revealed at the seventh trumpet. And when is the seventh trumpet? The seventh trumpet is when godliness is revealed by Christ and his coming, and on one side, Babylon and iniquity. Only two sides at the very end. Now, with all this diverse variety of interpretations, how will people choose? Okay? Now, I want to say this. There are 7 trumpets. At the 7th trumpet, Revelation 10:7 says, the mystery is finished at the 7th trumpet. And Revelation 11:15 says, at the 7th trumpet, the mystery, not only is it finished, but all that is Christ are Christ. But in the book of Revelations, in Revelations 9:2, it tells us there are 3 woes coming. The first woe in Revelations 9:12 is past. And then Revelation 11:14 says the second woe is past. But there are only 3. So when is the third woe? Revelation 12:12. The devil comes upon you. So at the time of the end of the 7th trumpet, there are just 2 groups. Okay? One, the mystery of God, and the other one, the devil comes upon them. So that's the 2 sides at the time of the end. Now, at the time of the end, it's just like the flood. It's the judgment of the living. At the time of the end, when it was a flood, either you're in the ark or you're out of the ark. At the time of the end, there are 2 groups. But the complication is that both sides claim they are doing God's work. Both sides claim that they represent God on earth. That is what the problem is. From this variety of prophecies will emerge a drawing to one group or the other. Now, I want to emphasize church and state. And so important because to understand prophecy, it's about church and state. Because we cannot be the people of God cannot be persecuted unless church and state came together. Right? You had to be vaccinated because government, state, came together with World Health Organization. And between the two of them, you had to be vaccinated. That was the power that came together. Now, church and state is a spiritual power. Now, in Revelation 17:1, we read this. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials and talked with me, saying, Come unto me, come hither. I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth on many waters. Now, this apostate church sitteth on many waters. In other words, she is supported. She is supported by waters. And the waters are where the whore sitteth are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So even nations support her. So it is a vast religious power. Now what else does it say? The great whore sitteth on many waters. But in addition, the power that she gets is from the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth, the people of the earth, have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now, this word fornication is not sex in prophecy, because you can't imagine, it's not possible to imagine that an apostate church are committing sexual acts with the states. So it is a illegitimate relationship of church and state. Now, this is the great whore that misleads the world. And there were many examples of church and state. I mean, before Babylon, Egypt, Assyria. But the Bible in Daniel tells us, let's just start understanding church and state from Babylon in detail. And so Nebuchadnezzar built this statue to be worshipped. And he gathered together his princes, his governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, rulers. This is government. So government and the need to be worshipped by Nebuchadnezzar, church and state, our first example. Okay, I'm going to skip a bit because I think I've got too many slides. Okay, now the three angels' message is about church and state. First, Creator God. He's the one worthy to be church and state, but not the others. The wine of fornication. Fornication, church and state. Why does the three angels' message need to go to every nation, tongue, and people? Every nation is requested, at first perhaps requested, but enforced to form church and state. That's why that message has to go to every nation. And the mark of the beast is the mark of church and state, and enforced worship. Once it's enforced, it's state, enforcing religion. So the third angel's message, at the core of it, is church and state. Now, a stone will come in the future and break down this statue from head to toe. Now, Babylon was way back in history. How can a stone break down this statue from head to toe? From Babylon to Medo-Persia and so forth. These are historical empires. And grind it to dust. Now, what does that mean? What is so toxic in the whole statue from head to toe? Church and state. Man wanting to be God. Now, the great controversy. when the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine, are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and sustain their institutions, then Protestant America, which had separated church and state, will have formed an image to the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. So this is prophecy. Prophecy which was so apparent to me with John Paul II and Ronald Reagan has grown to be adopted by Protestant America. They saw how, by church and state, between Reagan and John Paul II, how it could crush communism in Europe. And you know what happened? The USSR lost their power. Gorbachev had to resign. The Berlin Wall came down. Communism was crushed for the very first time. The US of A failed in Vietnam, failed in Korea to crush communism, failed in Cuba, but in Europe they succeeded. And so America had great affection and respect for the church that helped them crush communism. And that was the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Roxana and I and our daughter, we happened to be in Germany at that time, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So since we were there, we said, let's go and see what the celebration is about. So we went, and there were musicians leading the procession just by the wall. And at the head, right after the musicians, came the priests in their robes. Why priests in the fall of the Berlin Wall? Why were priests leading the procession? Why? Because it's church and state. That's why they were leading the procession. Okay. Now, this is happening in the US. Every day is breaking news. News of things happening. This is Mike Johnson. He has already declared before Trump won that church and state, the separation which is in the Constitution, is a misnomer, is wrong. It's going to come together. Now, whoever the president may be he a Democratic or a Republican, the Speaker of the House is the second most powerful man in the US. This is what is called Project 2025. It was written in 2023 and 2024, before Trump got power in 2025. And it was already in Project 2025 in the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that Sabbath, or in their case, they say Sabbath, but they mean Sunday, will be legalized as a rest day, hoping that people will come to church. And this stirred up Christians to want to vote for Trump. And this is Jonathan Barry. He just got appointed as the solicitor for the Labor Department. And he's the one who drafted the Project 2025 on legalizing a rest day. And this is him being interviewed by CIC. And CIC is the Catholic Information Center. And he was saying, the rest is not just a secular rest, it's rest for time with God, time worshiping God. So it's not just a secular rest, it is a time for church, worshiping God. Vice President Vance has endorsed a book by this man, talking about Sabbath laws. This man is a Christian nationalist. He has started many churches in Washington, and he had said, when asked, so if there is a national reformation in the US for revival, I believe that will result in a national honoring of the Lord's Day, which is Sunday. I do believe that that's gonna happen. Now, Trump was, before he won, he was criticized and laughed at in relation to something called Project 2025, which is a blueprint for how the Republicans will run the US when they won. And at that time, he said, no, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. Now, Project 2025 has this legalization of a rest day, amongst many other things. And now, Trump has nominated 18 people who had written Project 2025 out of 38. Almost half of them are in there. So you can now look at Project 2025 and anticipate where Trump's administration will go. Pope Leo XIV came to be appointed as Pope, and his first inaugural Mass, he referred, first of all, he talks about togetherness, about sister Christian churches coming together, and other religion all coming together in relation to peace and acceptance and brotherhood. And then he referred to his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII. He's 14. He referred to the 13th. And what was he referring to Pope Leo XIII about? About something called Rerum Novarum, something that Pope Leo XIII had written. And it had to do with Sunday, a religious Sunday, and that's not surprising. But he talked about how it is Sunday rest in relation to the Sabbath, and equating or mixing up and blending the Sabbath with Sunday, as if there is no difference. Now, are conservative Christians in the US, are they having a voice in this thing? Christian conservatives, many are against Christian nationalism. Okay? They see it as political, as confusing Christian faith, as a nationalist US ideology, and they are criticizing Christian nationalism for reverting to Constantinism. Who was the one who instituted Sunday as a rest day for Christians? Constantine. So the conservative Christians' voices many are against this. And even more are against this. They are saying the kingdom of God and earthly political rule should be separate. It distorts the gospel if you bring God and earthly political rule together. It is spiritual. God is spiritual. Church is spiritual, not political. Right? So they are against this. And this is the conservative religion. But the great controversy, 137 years ago, had written this: the Constitution guarantees the people the right to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience. Religious liberty was the fundamental principle. You cannot enforce a day of rest. The union of churches with the state, be the degree ever so slight, does in reality bring the church nearer the world. How does the enforcement of a day of rest bring the church nearer the world? A lot of people say it's good. Well, in Singapore, if you throw rubbish, you get fined. Okay? And so the fine causes you not to throw rubbish. But it doesn't make you a better person. It compels you. It doesn't change your heart. Okay? So you enforce people a day of rest, hoping they'll go to church. And eventually 666 is an enforced mark of worship. You don't make good Christians. So it is actually, the danger is this. Anything that's lovely, that's of the heart, if anyone enforces it, you enforce love, you destroy love. You enforce worship, you destroy worship. And if you bring people together of all the religion in the name of one God, you destroy that one God. Because He who is God is unique. And if everyone else of the other gods were gods, then the true God is destroyed. And this is what is going to happen. Okay? In the name of peace, in the name of prosperity, in the name of togetherness and brotherhood, it would destroy what is true. And this is what's going to happen. And that's where church and state is going. And so Ellen White wrote a lot more about church and state, that it interferes with the conscience of others. We have to protect the liberty of how we regard God, and we should not allow civil power to come against that conscience. Now, I want to say this. Why are Seventh-day Adventists so sensitized to this church and state? Because in 1888, now that's 137 years ago, there was a Pope Leo XIII. Now, we have a Pope Leo XIV now. Pope Leo XIII is the one, during his rule, this man, Senator Blair, tried to put Sunday law into the Senate, through the Senate, and he failed. Why? Because one of our historian, a man called A.T. Jones, debated with him, and you can still see the transcript in the websites. And how did he win this debate against Blair? Blair said, well, Sunday law is good, gives people a rest. Why can't the government enforce a Sunday rest? And A.T. Jones said, we have to render to God from our heart, directly one to God. You can't render to God what is God. You can't render to Caesar, the government, what is due to God. Okay? So it is a heart one-to-one. That's what's so important. And that's why we're so sensitive. Because at that time, there was already a direct attempt at church and state. And so having defeated it once, we are very sensitized to it expressing itself again. Now, the outcome. The bill was heavily debated, but ultimately failed. However, many states already had Sunday blue laws at the time. So the idea was not new. What made the Blair bill significant was that it was federal and explicitly religious. Now, this is a comment that you can get of what people think what happened at that time. It's not just what Seventh-day Adventists think, but what the rest of the Senate think and what the rest of Congress thought. So in summary, the 1888 Blair Sunday Rest Bill was an attempt to unite church and state in principle by enshrining a religious practice, Sunday observance, into federal law. It did not pass, but it stands as a landmark case in American debates on religious liberty. I will skip a few slides, and I want to show you a few more things. Now, this is Pope Leo XIII, the one who wanted Sunday rest in 1888. And he wrote in his encyclical, the Rerum Novarum, he wrote about them being popes, right? We, the popes, hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. This is how they feel about their right to enforce religion. Trump has pulled together a 13-man commission. This commission is to test whether they can put church and state together. And that's how the political observers and the writers are looking at this. Now, I want to show you this. This is 23rd July 2018. This is Trump's first presidency, before the second. He already had his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, state to Crux Stuff, which is an independent newspaper. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Pope Francis and the Catholic Church have a central role in promoting religious liberty. He had already wanted that previously. And so now that he's got a 13-man commission with Catholic cardinals and archbishop, what do you think is the aim? It's the Roman Church having a central role. Okay, these are a lot of conservative Christians talking about how church and state is wrong, and that the USA, by having church and state, is idolizing the state. Okay? Causing the state to be an idol for the people. Now, lately, Charlie Kirk wrote a book, and he was assassinated and killed. His book is Stop in the Name of God. Okay? Keep the Sabbath, how to change your life. But he keeps the Sunday as well. So Charlie Kirk is blending, like everybody else, church and state. The Pope, Pope Leo XIII is blending. Pope Leo XIV is blending. Charlie Kirk is blending. Here is Pope Leo. There it is. Pope Leo XIV now is blending, making no difference between the Sabbath and Sunday. And so, this blending of Sabbath and Sunday is like the flavor of the day now. As if there is no difference between the day blessed from a secular day. As if both are holy. And so what we have is blending of Sabbath and Sunday. And Charlie Kirk, after he died, they had a memorial. And this is written by Steve Bannon. He is a strategist. He was a strategist for Trump, a political strategist. And this is what he wrote. The whole service, the memorial, was muscular Christianity. Now this is church and state grabbing Charlie Kirk as a martyr. Now they've got blood to justify Christian nationalism. Muscular, you know, a form of muscular Christianity. Christian nationalism was put forward here in the memorial of a slain American martyr. You had the United States Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, the President of the United States, Charlie's team, and the widow. The most powerful people in the US government. When you promote something, it's best promoted with blood. Right? And whether Charlie Kirk was a martyr or not, he became a martyr. And that shows you where the whole thing is going. This is the Supreme Court. 6.5 Catholics in the Supreme Court. So when it comes to a decision on whether the Constitution really have a separation of church and state or not, this is where it'll go. So, Ellen White says, the Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf. They reach over the abyss to clasp the hands of the Roman power. This country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling the rights of conscience. Whether you believe in God or not, and I'm sure, you too have a lot of friends who don't. And they love freedom. They say, I don't believe in God because there are too many restrictions, and I love freedom. So whether you believe in God, and whether you, even if you don't and you love freedom, the end of freedom is before us. And that's why the Bible says some people receive the mark of the beast on their hands only because they yield, even though they don't believe, they don't yield it with their mind. They don't receive the mark on their foreheads, but they yield it because they yield it with their hand. They don't believe, and yet they have yield to it. Oh yeah, there is talk in the Bible, right, in Ellen White's quote, about by the decree enforcing the institution of papacy in violation to the law of God, the nation, United States, will disconnect herself from righteousness when Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when Protestantism shall reach over the abyss to clasp the hands with spiritualism. When under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of constitution as a Protestant and Republican government. And then she concludes, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous workings of Satan. The end is near. Yes. And so the church that is behind all this is participating in spiritualism, uniting all religion already. And this is not new. This is old news. Now I want to say this, that 137 years ago, Ellen White wrote, and this is the 1888 revision of the Great Controversy. But during this time, in the 1800s, during the time when the 1888 version of the Great Controversy was written, there was the Roman Church and the Protestantism were at loggerheads, but she said they will unite. Now they were at loggerheads here, and you can see it. The 1800s saw a period known as the Second Great Awakening for Protestantism in the United States. Prominent figures such as Charles Grandison Finney during those days advocated against Roman Catholicism, amongst other perceived evils. The American Bible Society, a Protestant organization, advocated for the unification of Protestant denominations in order to combat Catholicism. Deep distrust existed among Protestants towards the papacy. It was during this time when they were fighting and still at odds that she wrote the Great Controversy, which said they will come together. And that time is right before us. And then there is this other news. In 1871, the Protestant rulers of Germany undertook a program known as, a German name, a culture struggle, which saw the suppression of German Catholicism. They wanted to keep it down. The German Ministry of Education Catholic Bureau was abolished, and openly political priests were persecuted. In 1872, the Jesuits were expelled from Germany. So this was a time of tremendous difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. And even in that time, when they were fighting, she could write in the 1888 version of the Great Controversy that they will come together. Now this is the power of prophecy. What seems impossible happens. And it's happening at such a rapid pace that it is everyday breaking news. So prophecy is not theory. Prophecy is not just about Jesus coming back. It's central, but it is about the end, when a time when people cannot differentiate between what is evil and what is good. I want to end here to give us a thought why the Sabbath is central to this issue. In Hebrews 4:9, it says, "There remaineth therefore a rest for the people of God." Now this was written to the Hebrews, and the Hebrews were at that time Christians. But it says, "There remaineth a Sabbath, a rest for the people of God." Now this rest is not the weekly rest. They were already having their weekly rest, okay, during that time. But it says there remains a rest, and that word rest is sabbatismos. It's not the weekly Sabbath. It is that heavenly rest in the heavenly Sabbath with God Himself and Christ. And the book of John says, Christ has come to gather us all into that oneness which He had with the Father from everlasting to everlasting. Okay? Now that is the Sabbath, sabbatismos. Now that word sabbatismos only existed once in Hebrews 4:9. So it's not the weekly rest. Okay? This is the rest we can look forward to. But this is the rest which Adam and Eve had with God in Eden. That perfect rest. But that perfect rest, that sabbatismos in Eden, was disrupted by the serpent, by the fall. And then we had that weekly rest. So, our weekly Sabbath rest is a memorial, a looking backwards. I've got a slide for that, hang on. Okay, so that was the fall. Our weekly Sabbath is after the fall. So, our weekly Sabbath is a memorial of that sabbatismos, that perfect rest which Adam and Eve had with God. Are we to look for a sabbatismos, a heavenly rest? Yes. That's why Hebrews 4:9 says, "There remains a rest, a sabbatismos for the people of God." Where is it? In the new heavens and new earth. Our weekly Sabbath is a shadow of the future sabbatismos. It's a memorial to the past, but it is a shadow of that one. Now, people in the old times, before Calvary, they kept the Passover. The Passover was a shadow of Calvary. The people who kept the Passover, knowing its significance, were the ones who received the reality of Calvary, right? Because of the shadow, they kept the shadow. The shadow pointed to the reality. Now, we who keep the shadow will receive the reality. And that is so important, right? I'm going to skip that and skip that and skip that. Now, Sunday. They're blending it. Right? Sabbath, Sunday, blending it. Everybody is blending it. All the leaders are blending it. When we study with non-SDAs, it's blended already in their minds. Now, Sunday is a memorial of Calvary, right? Resurrection, the Lord's Day. Sunday is a shadow of what? It's a shadow of the legalization under church and state of the future. That is fast becoming a reality. So, if people keep Sunday, they're keeping a memorial. But they should realize it is a shadow for a legalized day of rest by the church and state power that's rising as we look upon the USA and the events that we see. All right, I think we are people blessed of God. I became a Seventh-day Adventist at 38, and 38 years later now, I feel the reality of prophecy and God's hand over the events of the earth, over the events of our personal life. May we all be blessed. Amen.